Welcome to the Lentil Intervention Podcast, talking all things movement, whole food nutrition and environmental wellness with your hosts, Ben and Emma.
Hello and welcome everybody to episode 20 of our podcast. My name is Ben Alderberg, coming to you from Auckland, New Zealand, and as always, Emma Strutt from Queensland. I started there because I believe you're not in Boona, but you're house sitting, or you're still in Boona. Where are you at the moment, Emma?
I'm cat sitting north side of Brisbane.
Okay, so we'll call it Brisbane. So welcome to the show as always, Emma. Now, before we get going, we have promised that we will announce the winners of the Vegan Living book giveaway. And we have two winners. One is Beth with the handle on Instagram Eating Mindfully, who has been sharing a lot of really cool stuff with what she's been doing in terms of plastics, soft plastics, in terms of reuse and recycling, etc. So well done to you, Beth. We'll send you a message, get your details, and get a book sent out to you. And the handle Blanchard, not sure. You put a really nice review. Thank you very much on Apple Podcast, probably about a week ago. Now, because we can't reach you, please reach us. So whether it's through Facebook, Instagram, or even an email directly to us, admin@thelentilintervention.org. Send us your details and we can also get a book sent out to you. So thank you very much for entering that competition. And without further ado, Emma, straight into it. Who's our next guest?
All right, so today we're joined by James Wilson, who for 40 or so years was a typical Kiwi sheep and beef farmer eating a pretty standard diet. However, he's now living a whole food plant-based lifestyle after experiencing some personal health scares. And he's also written 2 books, so he's a very busy man, Plant Paradigm and Losing the Silver Spoon. He's a fascinating man with a fascinating story. So James, we'll bring you on. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Now, James, I have got a copy of your book in my hand. It's a nice, I call it an old school style pocket-sized book. Really nice to handle. Fantastic book. And we're talking about the plant paradigm, of course. And to kick off, before we get straight into the book, tell us a little bit about yourself, your background. As Emma mentioned, a typical Kiwi sheep and beef farmer, 3rd, 4th generation farmer, I believe, in the top of the South Island. Is that correct?
No. All but the last piece. I was raised in the Manawatu, in the North Island.
Yes.
And farmed in that region for most of my life, for a big chunk of my life anyway. And it was a sheep and beef farm. And I was an avid meat eater and milk drinker, and raised my children more or less to eat meat at every meal, certainly at least twice a day. And that's how I started life, and that carried on till something like 12 years ago. I gave up farming about 20 years ago, and 12 years ago I became vegan.
Now, in the book you mentioned that, was it your father, or if not your father, perhaps his father, that's, something about it's almost a duty to farm, whether it's providing wool for the soldiers' uniform, or it's providing meat, or it's that sort of sense of pride, isn't it, to be a farmer?
Yes. I grew up after the Second World War, and in my time in the early days, my father kept saying that the most patriotic thing we could do in New Zealand was farm lots of sheep and beef and send it to Britain, because they were pretty hungry. And then the Korean War came along, and so that meant we had to produce wool for the soldiers. Yes, and it was a patriotic duty in those days. Now, as well as I guess made money.
And of course. And tell us a little bit more about yourself in terms of, were you active? I mean, our farmers are pretty active themselves, very hands-on, but would you have considered yourself to be healthy and living quite a fulfilling life during that stage as well?
Absolutely. I thought health was centered around meat and animal protein. That's what I believe. And and I lived that way. In fact, in the other book that you just mentioned, Emma mentioned, there's a time in my life when I was desperately hungry, but I was convinced that if I didn't eat a little bit of meat every day, I'd probably cark it. Which is so. Now I realise how foolish that was. But yes,
well, I mean, that's the message we get a lot, isn't it? It's fed to us by a lot of the different nutrition societies as well. So you're totally understandable in thinking that way.
Yeah, and of course, there's a vast number of my friends still think that way.
So, living life as a farmer, day to day, thinking, you're living the life that you believe is the right, healthy way. And then you had but actually 2 health scares. Yes,
the first one, I forget how long ago it was, but quite a long time ago now. I suffered a pulmonary embolism and went through a spectacularly memorable near-death experience, and came out of it thinking that, now I'm going to change my ways, not knowing what ways I was going to change, but I thought I was going to change something. And nothing happened at all, really. I just went back to living the same way as I had. The second one occurred when I was in the South Island, and when I came out of that one, luckily I survived both of them, which was extremely good luck. But I also could put that down to the good health I had. When I came out of the second one, I was told that I was to be on warfarin, and to be on warfarin for the rest of my life, in fact. And seeing one of my main occupations is clearing predators, and we feed rats warfarin to kill them, I was very unhappy about living on rat poison. And after a few months or weeks or months of this, where I felt dreadfully unwell and bled every time I looked at something that might scratch me, I resolved to give up warfarin, and was told by a multiple of people that I would die if I gave up warfarin. But I was feeling so dreadful, I thought, well, give anything a go. Then, very fortuitously, at that time, I heard an interview between Kim Hill on national radio and
Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn.
Yeah, Esselstyn, is it? Yes, Esselstyn. Yes. And he was so convincing that by the end of the interview, I went through the kitchen and cleaned everything out of the cupboards and declared that was my life from now on. And that's how it happened.
Now, was it convincing because you were already at a crossroad with your health? If you had heard that same conversation, that same interview, say, we don't know how many years, but say prior to your first pulmonary embolism, would that have had the same impact?
None at all. No, in fact, quite a few people, I've bumped into quite a few people since hearing that interview, which was, I think, 12 years ago now. Mm-hmm. And it's quite a number of them remembered it, but no one else got struck by it like I did. I have met one person who was struck by it. And it was perfectly, the timing was immaculate, because I was very worried I was going to die. And he cleared, because I'd been told that the warfarin was to thin my blood to deal with my damaged heart. I was convinced that I was in deep trouble. But then Caldwell Esselstyn pointed out that the plant-based whole food diet allows your vascular system to come right.
So you made the shift overnight. Tell me about the first couple of weeks. Was that tough for you, or did you just, the motivation was there, so you found it easy?
I think it was fairly tough. Yes, I've told a number of people since that if you're going to change, I gave up smoking years ago, and I did that by cold turkey a bit ultimately. And I thought that the only way I was going to deal with this problem was go cold turkey. Excuse the expression. Mm. And so, yes, I think it was quite hard. And there were a number of interesting things that happened during that early period. There was an interesting one that happened maybe 2 months after I'd gone vegan, when I was telling someone. No, I was telling my wife, that's right. I was telling my wife that my fingernails were looking unwell. They were going crinkly and breaking. And I said to her, I think this is I think I'm not getting enough calcium this way. And another fortuitous thing happened that day. In the mail came a book from a friend of mine about going vegan. And I opened the parcel, opened the book, and it fell out open on the page about calcium. And it declared that when people give up milk, there is a period of time when you do become calcium deficient until your body gets ready to take calcium from plants and other materials rather than just straightforwardly from milk. So, and that was so lucky. So I carried on what I was doing, and a month later my nails were perfect again.
Amazing. I mean, you can imagine, especially to go, as you say, cold turkey or toki or tofu, I don't know, whatever expression people use in this case. But I guess the difficulty is you're going from one way of living, the way you know to eat, meat, veg, or, meat, starch and a veg sort of approach on a plate. Yeah. And the next day it's sort of, right, we're taking the meat off the plate. What are you replacing it with? Or are you, how do you fill that gap? How do you not go hungry? So it's a very radical change for someone that's grown up their whole life, not just eating a particular way, but living a particular way. So,
absolutely.
So how did you, okay, so you heard a fascinating and real inspiring interview by Dr. Esselstyn. Like you had a good friend that sent you a book that might have given you some tips, but how did you actually go about straight away implementing that change? Where did you look for in terms of guidance?
I read voraciously as soon as I'd heard Esselstyn, and I read the China study to start with, and then I delved into authors like John McDougall and I can't remember any other. They don't come to me so easily now. Anyway, I read a lot of books, and I worked out for my own benefit that with plant-based whole food, it doesn't matter how much you eat, you're not going to get overweight with it. And so I made myself eat an enormous amount, thinking as long as I ate enough, there would be I'd get enough goodness out of it. So I did eat enormous quantities of vegetables, and a reasonable mixture with beans and lentils and stuff as well. And I certainly survived.
And apparently you and your wife both lost a bit of weight, which was unexpected as well.
Yeah, we were both slightly overweight. We were by that we recognise now. We both lost about 20% of our live weight.
Wow.
Over the first sort of 3 or 4 months. But that didn't hurt. That didn't concern us particularly. Although the non-believers said we were wasting away, but we felt fabulous.
Of course they would. And how did that, so whilst you're going through that change, how is your mindset around what you're actually doing as a farmer? When did that start coming into play?
Well, I wasn't farming in those days. That's
right.
Good.
Okay.
I'd sold the farm some years prior, but I was still an avid meat eater. I was a fantastic customer at the local butchers, and so I didn't have any conflict with the meat I was producing because I'm no longer producing meat.
Right.
That would have made it a lot harder.
Do you think if you were still farming, do you think how have you ever thought about that sort of that whole what if scenario? What if you were still a farmer? Do you think that might have sort of made the lifestyle change that you underwent more difficult, or perhaps you may have resisted going down that path? Have you ever thought about that?
Can I answer that in a slightly oblique way?
Of course.
What I have discovered when I went plant-based, it was because of my health and nothing else.
Yeah.
Subsequently, and the reason that I wrote the book, I came to realize that there are 3 cornerstones to being vegan. And the first one is human health. The second one is environmental damage caused by growing and eating meat. And the third one is cruelty to animals. Now, as a farmer, I had no idea that we were being cruel to animals. I'd just been brought up to treat the animals the way everyone else had treated them. But now that I'm where I am now, I could never be a farmer now, because the cruelty we subject to animals is just horrific. And so I guess if I'd still been farming and became vegan, I think within short order I would have probably sold the farm anyway and given up farming. But I had never thought of that before now.
Yeah. Because, you do cover the those three aspects. And in fact, I quite like how you actually, in the book, you actually say there's a fourth reason to being a vegan, and that is the joy of the joy in being a vegan, which I quite like that, because it feels like it's a sense of, you're acting responsibly. You're acting responsibly towards your health. You're acting responsibly towards other sentient beings, so the animals. And of course, as there's a lot of publicity going around this now, and a lot of action being needed, is the state of our planet. So I quite like that you add that fourth component, which kind of sums up the three others. And it's not just you doing it because you have to, because it actually makes you feel good.
Oh, absolutely. There's no sense of me having to anymore. There's a strange phenomenon now, whereas in the old days, if I was milking a cow or collecting hens' eggs, or, cutting up some meat, I'd start salivating at the thought of eating it. Now, if someone hands me a bunch of spinach, I start salivating, which I would have never done in the past. So it's a real pleasure to be a vegan. Yes.
So what actually did inspire the book, Plant Paradigm?
Well, I read so much about it, and I still fail to communicate adequately to so many of my friends as to the value of being vegan. And I sort of got fed up with it, really. And for the three reasons, I think that farming's out of date now for a variety of reasons, including the ones that they're under threat from what I call fake meat and fake milk. And so that they don't recognize that there's a tsunami coming over the hill. And I wanted to warn people about that. I wanted to warn all my friends and anyone who read the book that there's a way of staying alive without resorting to pills and potions, and being fit and healthy. And like everyone else nowadays, I recognise the damage being done unnecessarily to the environment. And that's not just the global warming and things, but the desperate destruction of the biodiversity in New Zealand, I think, equates to the Amazonian disaster, but on a smaller scale.
100%.
I wanted to publish a book with the idea that I might throw it down on different people's dining tables and say, for God's sake, read this.
Mm-hmm. So how's the reception been with all the friends so far?
Well, with my friends around here that have watched over the last 10, 12 years, they've now become quite benign to it. So they sneak away and eat their own meat in their own place. But they're quite happy to come and eat my food at my place. And more preparing vegan dishes, or at least dishes that I can eat the vegetable parts of the menu when I go to their places. Whereas in the early days, they totally rejected that. So I guess I'm winning. And I must admit, on a good day, I look around and I see quite a large number of people who have changed. And I've had quite a bit of correspondence from people who have read my book and have written and said, I've pushed them over the edge into the world of being a vegan. So I'm quite comfortable with that.
Well, I think just impacting one person is a job done, and so I think, you're not going to expect to change everyone's sort of beliefs, but we need, if we have more people like yourself writing more books, speaking more about it, compiling documentaries, whatever, the more podcasts like this as well, the more awareness that's created, the more people will eventually listen. And I think it goes back to that interview you listened to by Dr. Esselstyn, is you were already in a state of, if I may use the word, desperation, right? Your health was at a tipping point, and that struck really well with you. It's sort of, here's hope. Whereas if you're super healthy, active, everything's fine, why change something that you don't see as broken? And I think that's the point. We just got to keep getting that message out. And for those the listeners that are interested in purchasing this book, which I highly recommend, super easy to do. We'll put a link in the show notes, but it's plantparadigm.com. Get on the website and you just click on the tab Purchase, and you get yourself a copy of this amazing book. Now, in the book, I haven't gone through the whole book yet because I haven't had a chance, but there's one thing I really liked in there that puts a lot of perspective in terms of a lot of people that say, why we need meat. And there's a clock that you reference to that depicts the past million years and shows at the beginning or near the beginning the invention of fire and how long it took before we had, spears and arrows and so on to hunt animals, and also the relation with development of the brain, etc. And I've never seen that kind of perspective depicted that way. But I think that you really choose some really interesting angles to demonstrate why we should be eating the way we believe is the right way, which is a whole food plant-based diet.
Thank you for that. I put months of work into trying to work out how I could, in broadest terms, describe what is now shown as that clock face. And whilst the details might be wholly inaccurate, the principle is absolutely right. And it's such a short span of our time on Earth as humans that we've actually been domesticating animals and eating meat. It's quite ridiculous to think we were born to do that. We have been over the last 10,000 years. We definitely have evolved into animals that think we depend on meat. But there's so many plant-based whole food advocates nowadays, and we're all thriving. So it's a complete lie that we have to have meat and milk. Absolute lie.
Have you had much actual resistance from perhaps not just farming communities, but more, shall we say, commercial entities or anything like that, having been a farmer yourself? If you're allowed to answer that.
Well, I was just trying to put them into this perspective. Yes, I think an awful lot of industries feel like they're under threat if veganism took hold. I mean, look at the vast amount of fertilizer that's brought into the country and poured on the land. And so there's all sorts of companies that are dependent on the agricultural industry as we know it now, that are working very hard along with the farmers to preserve the status quo. But in a more immediate case, it staggers me how, 12 years ago, it was almost impossible to walk into a restaurant and ask for a vegan meal. They just didn't understand it. And even today, I do my best to choose the restaurants I'm going to eat in if I'm going to eat out, to get a decent plant-based whole food meal. Some of them are making a pretense of it, but it's not adequate. So I guess even the restaurants are under threat, I think, to change their ways. And
a lot are changing. I think it's accelerating because, like you say, it's they're starting to catch up. It's from a commercial sense, there's certainly money to be made, and I think that's why they don't necessarily understand the concept of veganism. They'll call a dish vegan, but it'll still have cheese in it, for instance. They're trying to play catch up because they don't want to be left behind. Yet, I think there's still a bit more work to be done. But I just want to touch a little bit on the environmental side of things, because having been a farmer yourself, there's an incredible amount of, especially for New Zealand. We hear Dr. Mike Joy, who's very active in talking about the state of our waterways, so our rivers, our streams, our lakes, etc. I attended a really fascinating talk last week where Dr. Mike Joy was there, but there were a few other individuals from that spoke about regenerative farming practices, versus the intensive farming that we have here in New Zealand, which is the biggest problem when it comes to either the leaching of nitrates and phosphorus and so on into our waterways. As a farmer, or as a past farmer yourself, what do you think the biggest things are from an environmental point of view, the impact? And to add on to that, do you think regenerative farming practices can solve that, or do you think that's just a layer masking the inevitable?
Whoa. Where to start? Well, first of all, within my book, there is some graphs produced not by me, but I had permission to use them from a professor in Canada, Professor Mill, I think his name is. I haven't got it right in front of me. Anyway, those graphs are very, very indicative of the fact that 10,000 years ago, the majority of vertebrates in the world were wild animals.
Yes.
And a tiny slither of the vertebrates were humans. Today, there is a vast number of humans by live weight. There is a much, much larger by live weight bunch of domesticated animals: cattle, sheep, horses, goats, camels, dogs, cats, and a tiny sliver left of wild animals. So that the wild animals are being completely replaced by domesticated animals.
I think it's about 4% wild animals.
4% wild, 60% livestock, and 36 human.
Yeah.
So not a good ratio.
Yeah. Well, but the other point in there is there's a graph which shows the natural carrying capacity of the Earth, and that has declined over the last 10,000 years as we have cleared the jungle and bush and imposed domesticated animals. And everything above that line, which is, I don't know, maybe 3/4 of it or more probably, of above the line, is all being produced through oil, the application of oil-based products or oil-driven machinery or whatever. And so those 3/4, call it 3/4 for now, that 3/4 above the line is totally unsustainable if we gave up using oil. And yet we're meant to be giving up using fossil fuels within 30 years. And so the idea of having livestock in any shape or form in the future is actually, I think, unthinkable. And so now we get to regenerative agriculture. A lot of the farmers are talking about regenerative agriculture by using livestock to trample and graze land that has been shut up for a significant amount of time. The interesting thing is that in the 1970s, I introduced a system of farming on my own farm. I decided to go organic as a farmer, and I introduced a system which in those days we called sabbatical fallowing, which was regenerative farming by another name, really. And so I think in some respects, without knowing the most recent research work on it, we were doing regenerative farming back then. And once again, it was the animals that were pugging the ground and being caused, and we were just causing them distress because we were farming them still. And so a lot of the regenerative farming that's discussed these days is still using livestock in association with pastures to regenerate more carbon into the soil. And it is an effective way of getting carbon into the soil. But if you don't need meat, you don't need animals. And if you don't need animals, you can turn, 80% of the land that's farmed today into bush and leave the last 20% to grow a few veggies.
Yeah,
that's
good point. Because
from that you can detect that I'm not actually that enthusiastic about regenerative farming.
And it takes a lot of space, doesn't it? So if we're trying to rewild the earth and combat deforestation, it's a band-aid kind of band-aid method in my opinion.
Well, I agree with you. I think that the problem is that it's almost like a sop to the existing livestock farmers. Do it this way and you'll feel better. Because that's certainly what I did when I was doing my sabbatical farming. It was a wonderful sense of achievement of what I was doing. But it wasn't the right achievement because we were still usurping bushland and swampland, what we call swamp, but in fact wetland, and growing animals on it. I don't think it's necessary.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of sort of feel-good approaches, and there's parts of, I think, Rotorua and even Lake Taupo where certain farmers are being paid not to farm to help improve water quality. But that's not sustainable, because when you do the maths and you look at other regions that are, just as or even more intense in terms of the farming, there's no way you can afford that. I can't remember what the figures are, but it'll be billions of dollars to do that elsewhere. So there's a lot of supposed solutions, but I feel a lot of them sometimes tend to be political, just to win a few extra votes, keep a few people happy, and but you're not really addressing the roots of the problem.
No, I now live in Picton, and I'm looking out now as I talk to you across with the water to hills covered in bush. Now all that land was cleared and farmed as pasture land up until the late 1940s, and now it's all covered in beautiful bush. I know we've got predator problems in it, but nonetheless, it's all reverted to bush. And it's my claim that there's nowhere in New Zealand that wouldn't revert to wetlands and bush if we just walked away and left them. And we would, as you say, to rewild the country would be a very easy job. I don't know about the economy. I'm sorry, I don't know about the economy.
Yeah. Well, we'd have to change our dependence on what we export and what we generate income from. But dairy and beef and lamb exports is certainly a big contributor to our economy. So, look, we won't delve into something we maybe not experts in, but we know what's driving it. So it's we got to push from other aspects. And like you say, if we look at water quality, if we look at health issues, and even ethical reasons, there's enough good reasons to change our behaviours.
Absolutely. I always hope that my book would trigger one of those three things in any particular individual, but that hasn't worked. But you don't have to, it may be the ethical, it may be the environmental, it may be the human health. But I believe any one of those arguments is significant enough to go vegan.
And it's a reason, and any of those reasons is why anyone begins their journey to veganism. So, no, I think, a book like yours is certainly powerful, and it takes, like I said, if one person reads it and feels the impact and makes a big change themselves that then impacts others around them, it's achieving that purpose. And this book is not as arduous as, say, the China study. You can certainly read your book in much quicker time. You can digest things a lot easier. And what's important about your book that's really crucial is it's based here in New Zealand. So there's a lot of, one can relate. So for our Kiwi listeners, this is a book one can relate to, and not say, well, it doesn't happen here in New Zealand. This is in America, or this is in Asia, the China study, or whatever the case is. So I think books like yours are important, and we need more like them. We need the same in Australia. We need local authors to bring up the same general issues, but make them relatable to the immediate audience.
Right. Thank you. But I'd welcome as many as possible. Welcome them.
So what's life these days? I see you're pretty active in Picton. Now, for our listeners that are not in New Zealand, Picton is basically when you're trying to hop from the North Island to the South Island. One of the options is to take a ferry, so from Wellington, which is the capital, and the ferry takes you into a small town called Picton, which is effectively the top of the South Island. And when you've just said that you look out at the bush, that's the sounds that one travels through to get into Picton. What's life like now? I see you're pretty active with potluck dinners, other sort of climate change groups and so on.
Yes, I am.
Pretty much a life of advocacy?
Yes. All of that. We have regular potluck plant pure dinners, and I belong to a local climate change organisation. But most of my time I spend dealing with predators in the bush around here, and we've got there's a reserve here called Kaipupu Point, and we've dealt with the predators on that to a large extent. And now we've got another group that I've initiated called Picton Dawn Chorus, and we're aiming to trap something like 4,500 hectares around Picton, in around Picton. And I know there's a terrible confusion about killing some rats and not other animals, but I've thought about it long and hard, and I'm so desperately keen to see the local bird life regenerated that I think the ends justifies the means. But so I'm very active. I'm nearly 80, and I'm doing my trap lines every week, and fit as anything.
Wow, the amazing power of plants to keep you in the bush at the age of 80. That certainly wouldn't be the case if you continued with your old lifestyle, I would say.
Not at all. I doubt if I'm pretty certain I wouldn't have been here, but I certainly wouldn't have the energy I've got now, which was an early affirmation by someone I read way back, that if you eat veggies all the time, it increases your metabolism, and if you don't walk more and be more active, you just hit your body up more. You can't store the food as fat. And I don't know how much of that's true, but it certainly that has the effect. It has that effect on me.
I think a lot of the benefits from eating a whole food plant-based diet as far as weight management goes is just the low calorie density of the meals. So you can sit down, you can have a huge, big, massive meal and eat till your heart's content. But because all of those veggies have hardly any, calories in them per 100 grams compared to your meat and dairy, you're sitting pretty, basically.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's absolutely right. There's an interesting comment here. It's got nothing to do with the subject, but I'll tell you anyway. That it's that in the early days, I read somewhere that it was worthwhile eating salt while you're eating this plant-based diet, because salt is a good food. It makes you want to eat more. And so I used to eat a lot of salt with my food, and I've actually advocated that to others to start up, because if they're going to go hungry, that's pointless. So it's better to eat salt and fill yourself up with the veggies. But subsequently, in more recent times, I've discovered that eating salt's very bad for me, and I've given up. In the last couple of months, I've given up, and the effect of giving it up has dropped my blood pressure by more than I could have ever achieved by taking pills.
Oh, brilliant! Yep.
I was the author of my own demise as far as blood pressure goes, but now I'm the author of improving it. So.
Well, I mean, there is a lot of misinformation out there on the internet. So I've definitely heard people advocate for high salt diets before. I've even way back when, before I studied dietetics, I went to a naturopath who told me to basically make my food white with salt. So, yeah, that's definitely a common misconception.
Right. Well, personally, I've proved it conclusively, because my blood pressure crashed after I gave up. And once again, giving up salt wasn't that hard. Having given up cigarettes and given up meat and milk, giving up salt was a nothing.
No, and you'd know. I mean, dairy, or not dairy, but cheese, for instance, something I never knew as a past cheese lover myself, how much salt is actually contained within cheese. And
yes,
and then obviously when we talk about processed foods, salt is prevalent, and yeah, it's one of the issues in a typical Western diet, along with the sugars and the processed fats, the oils. I mean, the three addictive taste buds, the things that make you want to have more: sweet, salt, and fat. So, yeah, I think we can always argue whether we should have no salt at all or a little bit of salt, but certainly not the other end of the spectrum, which would certainly cause some health complications there. So luckily you've averted that early on. But yeah, James, it's really fascinating to speak to someone like yourself that's come from such a I say a hardcore background, a farmer, a Kiwi farmer, that all is meat and dairy. That's what your breakfast, lunch, and dinner revolves around. It's what you produce for the country. Like you say, it's a patriotic duty. It's not nice to say, but to have gone through health scares, to then pop out the other end and live such a fulfilling life like you do. At the age of 80, you're sort of contributing to your local environment, trying to bring back more local indigenous species, bird life, which New Zealand is previously been well known for, still is, but we want more of the bird life back, and being such an active advocate for living ethically, living healthily. Thank you so much. It's been really nice to have your story shared with us and our listeners.
It's been a great pleasure. Thank you very much. I love talking about it.
And again, to our listeners, I can only highly recommend this book. It's a good read. Plant Paradigm. We'll again put the link at the website. Make sure you grab yourself a copy. And again, thank you so much, James. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Lentil Intervention Podcast. If you found this interesting, make sure you subscribe and share it with your friends.